Well, if they've already lost their kid, they really have nothing further to lose. They should be speaking out. It's the people who have their kids that should be very careful.
I know I'm not alone in everything that's happened to me, but I want people to know that CS actually destroyed my family and didn't help my family at all.
I want to tell this story because mine isn't the only horror story out there. And if this can get people into action, then it's worth it.
They tore it completely apart, and it's not going to ever be back together again.
The rage that I have, because I know that other children are in foster care, they're getting abused, some of them die.
It's terrible. I don't know what our words say. We call them Chayawish, that means the devil work.
Because people don't know that this is going on. People find it so hard to believe that a children's aid society could act maliciously. It just goes outside of what people believe, but it's true. It's 100% true.
You know, I worked at various agencies in the city, and I saw families broken, just completely broken, families that had given up, families that no longer even visited their children because they were so discouraged with kind of hoops that they had to jump through in order to have access with their children.
Energy is focused on my son, my father, because you guys are trying to pressure me into signing this paper. You're telling me if I don't sign this paper, you're taking my kid. It's life or death. There's another option. We have the choice in Canada. We have the choice in Canada to a second option.
I just said I'm not going to talk any further about it.
The idea of Child Protective Services and its Canadian counterpart, the Child Aid Society, presents itself as a government organization that was created to protect children from all kinds of abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, mental. While it is true that they do take children from terrible situations and from parents that do not do their jobs properly, there is a dark side that is rarely talked about. Child Protective Services, or CPS, and the Child Aid Society, or CAS, have made their business on taking children from their homes and moving them into care of the state. It is required for their funding. They would not be able to maintain their large supply of social workers if they weren't removing children from their home. So what are they to do when they don't have enough calls to maintain their budget, keep all their employees hired on? They have to find reasons to remove children from their homes. Loving parents who care deeply for their child but give them a little extra leash find themselves under the microscope under the pretense of neglect or abuse. People who have watched me for a long time now know that I have focused my attention on crimes committed against children. I started out by discussing the large pedophile rings that are rampant in elite social circles, the Vatican, political circles, and more. One of my missions is to lift the veil on these people and their organizations. Episode 37 of my podcast is what brought my attention to the Child Protective Services. I came across the documentary called Innocence Destroyed, a short documentary created by Bill Bowen back in 2009-2010. This documentary was heartbreaking. It detailed a number of cases where children were taken from their homes, good homes. The transcripts of their court cases were forged, and the children were moved into terrible foster homes, sometimes as many as 20 other children, and many faced physical and sexual abuses in these households. In one specific case, a young girl of 4 years old, Adriana Cram, was taken from her mother, moved from the US to a foster home in Mexico, where she was tortured and murdered, and the mother only found out about her child's death about a year after. The mother's crime that made CPS remove her daughter from her care? She couldn't afford her daughter's medication. There is more, much, much more, to this short documentary, and I highly recommend that people check it out. But be prepared to see and hear terrible things. With these evil organizations running around to this day, I decided it was time to report on them again. It has been too long since these disgusting people have been brought to task. The Ontario Association of Children's Aid Society is the most powerful provincial government organization that regulates parents and their children. It states on its website that it provides advocacy and government relations, public education, training, information, and knowledge management, and event planning. Children's Aid Society have a large amount of power at its disposal, with the authority to remove children from the care of the parents. The problem is that this organization is incredibly corrupt. They only receive their funding by removing children from their homes, which means they have an incentive to do so. The more children removed from their homes, the larger their funding. The children are moved into foster care or group homes, but these homes are usually overcrowded since there is a profit to be made in foster parents. The more children they have under their care, the more money they are granted by the government. The problem with CAS workers is many of them are not registered social workers. In some circumstances, they have the authority to enter a home without a warrant. They can seize children without providing the parents with due process, interview the children without a lawyer present, forcefully medicate a child, and any parent that disagrees with these conditions can be punished by denying access to their children, sometimes permanently. This is more power and authority than the police have. Caseworkers do not permit clients, as they are called, to record meetings, and agencies cannot comment on these cases. Anonymous complaints mean the parents will never know who lodges the complaint against them. What is really disturbing is the CAS is used as a weapon by people in the medical and educational industry, such as doctors and principals, as a means to gain vengeance against parents in a personal vendetta, such as when they get into an argument. This happened back in 2011 to a man named Sean from Windsor, Ontario. After getting into a heated argument with the principal of his children's school, the principal called CAS and his children were taken away, 2 boys and 1 young girl. He was forced to move out, couldn't live with his wife, who spent more than a month in a battered women's shelter because CAS didn't want her and her children living with him. He went more than 8 months without seeing his family, was forced to see them in secrecy because if CAS caught wind he was visiting them, his children would be taken away from his wife's custody, which did happen after they were discovered. Now Sean can only see his children 3 times a week under supervision. His wife can see them 3 times a week unsupervised. As far as I know, this case is still ongoing. The Children's Aid Society also has the unethical and terrible practice of drugging up children on psychotropic drugs. Many foster children get misdiagnosed, sometimes unintentionally, but many times intentionally. The first advantage of this is to make children more docile and easier to control by both the social worker and the foster parents. Many times, the children are left on these drugs for many years at a time. The drugs are also paid for by the Ministry of Health, so the money spent on these pharmaceuticals don't come out of CAS's budget. This is a profitable endeavor for the pharmaceutical industry and the psychological industry. Dr. Marty McKay goes into greater detail.
I was a psychologist for 33 years and worked with the Children's Aid Society starting in 1976 until 2004 or 2005, at which time I didn't feel that I could in good conscience work with that agency any longer. One of the problems that I was most concerned about was the drugging of children in foster care. And those concerns that I raised in that regard led to the establishment of an expert panel by the Ontario government. There were some reforms to the system, however, since that time, I don't have complete faith that there has been substantial improvement in a lot of children in group home facilities in particular. The documentary that the CBC did regarding one of the children that I was able to rescue from the system revealed that he had been sexually abused in this home because he was put in a room with an older boy who had a known history of sexual acting out, and he was victimized. So in the name of child protection, this child was actually repeatedly sexually abused by an older boy while ostensibly in the care of the Child Protective Agency. And in terms of Jay, the child that I did the assessment on, going out, being taken off these drugs at the high levels that he was being given them, it can be very dangerous and has to be done in a very systematic way. And it took almost 18 months for him to be withdrawn from this medication. This is all documented in the CBC film called Jay's Story, Finding Normal. That he didn't have any of these diagnoses, in fact. He wasn't attention deficit disordered. He didn't have obsessive compulsive disorder and Tourette syndrome and mental retardation and all the host of diagnoses. No one had stopped to look at his chart and question any of the diagnoses. He was subject, even though he said he didn't like the effects of these drugs, he was never allowed to be heard on that. He was forcibly drugged, and the group home workers, as far as I could determine from my reading of the files, used threats and inducements to keep him taking these drugs. Since then, I've done a lot of research and found it wasn't just this agency. It's a lot of agencies throughout Ontario and in the United States. But the United States seems to be waking up. So once I went to one of these group homes and found that the children, some of them seemed to be in a daze and stumbling around, and found out what kind of medication they were on, I became very vocal about these concerns that this could not be. And this one child that I rescued, I had been brought in as an expert by the Children's Aid Society itself. And I was to do a parenting capacity assessment, and this child, who was 8 or 9 years old, had as many diagnoses as he had years of life. And I expected, after reviewing the file, that I was going to see a child who was basically brain damaged, and what I saw instead was a child who was in a drug-induced stupor. And it's an industry. There are lots of people making money off this. Some psychiatrists base their whole practice, or almost all of their practice, on treating children in foster care. And then the drugs, you have to question whether they're actually being used as a crowd control measure. Drugs are basically a lifelong enterprise. I mean, to a pharmaceutical company, this is music to their ears. But what I found as a member of the expert panel was that some of the caseworkers for the CAS actually thought that a child gave up his basic human rights when they were in care, which is not true. Either they're ignorant, or they're indoctrinated, or they simply are opportunists, that they believe that the Child and Family Service Act supersedes any other laws in the Dominion of Canada.
The power of the CAS allows them to intervene when they believe a child is at risk. There doesn't have to be any actual abuse or neglect that takes place. This phrasing gives quite broad powers to the CAS and its employees, since there is no definitive definition of what is considered at risk. The other problem is that this agency has a lack of oversight, meaning there is no one that they are accountable to. They are given this authority under the Child and Family Service Act of 1990. The act has been amended over the years, but even the last amendment in 2017 still enables the CAS workers the same widespread powers. Section 81 of the Act covers when a warrant can be issued. Subsection 6 covers authority to enter. It states, A child protection worker authorized to bring a child to a place of safety by a warrant issued under subsection 2 or an order made under clause 4D may at any time enter any premises specified in the warrant or order by force if necessary and may search for and remove the child. Subsection 7 covers bringing a child to a place of safety without a warrant. It states, a child protection worker who believes on reasonable and profitable grounds that A. A child is in need of protection, B. The child is younger than 16, and C. There would be a substantial risk to the child's health or safety during the time necessary to bring the matter on for a hearing under subsection 90 or obtain a warrant under subsection 2. May without a warrant bring a child to a place of safety. These sections of the Act give a lot of power to the Children's Aid Society. It is easy to manipulate and fake by the CAS workers, since the standard of evidence is so low in these cases. Section 93 of the Act covers evidence. It states, despite anything in the Evidence Act, in any proceeding under this part, A. The court may consider the past conduct of a person towards any child if that person is caring for, or has access to, or may care for, or have access to the child who is the subject of the proceeding, and B. Any oral or written statements or report that the court considers relevant to the proceeding, including a transcript, exhibit, or finding, or the reason for a decision in an earlier civil or criminal proceeding, is admissible into evidence. Any oral or written statement or reports. It is not required to have these reports or statements to be backed up by physical, hard evidence. This is exactly how the abuse of power comes into play and how the CAS can remove children from their parents by force and can manipulate and lie in order to do so. Bridget Gratnell goes into further description of how this is possible.
When the worker has sufficient grounds to believe that an apprehension is necessary, they get a warrant to go step into the home and just take the child, or take the child straight from school. And the problem with that is they do have to convince the justice of the peace that that is absolutely necessary and that their grounds are good. That's probably a very difficult hurdle to overcome, because I have not seen very many warrants come in at all. And so that you would say that there is a claim that most of the apprehensions are in fact illegal, because the workers do have the opportunity to go in there without a warrant if there is an immediate urgent need. Now, there is a question of what is urgent. Nobody can probably justify an urgency when they have watched this family for half a year and said, well, they're not doing the right thing. There's never really the need, right? Because they've watched these people, and now why is suddenly on April the 12th this urgent need, right? So this is why people say it's illegal, because they should have gotten a warrant. They have seen this. It's just maybe it's just the last straw type of thing that happens. It's not. It just tips the balance, and the worker says enough is enough. I'm taking the child, and so the parent says, well, that's illegal. You didn't have a warrant, and that's true. But illegal or not, the court, the authorities say, well, the child was taken. Who cares? Basically, so. They say that in the best interest of the children, it was done. They will never return a child simply because there was an illegal apprehension. A child will not be returned because the apprehension was illegal as a result of the illegality of it. Okay, so you will never get that remedy because they say, well, maybe it was wrong at the time to do it. They will acknowledge that there was illegal conduct. They will say society should never do that, you know, that's shame on you, not good, all of that. I'm not returning the children simply because of the fact that that apprehension was illegal, bad as it may have been. So there's a huge distinction between illegality in terms of the criminal conduct and illegality in terms of the Child and Family Services Act.
In 2009, Kevin Lieben released an article in the National Post about CAS. He provided multiple sources about the abuse children face under the CAS. University of Manitoba social work professor Brad McKenzie claimed 15 to 20% of children under the care suffer abuse or neglect. In 2008, 90 children died under the care of CAS. About 55% of claims are unsubstantiated according to Health Canada. From 1993 to 2001, Alberta, BC, and Ontario saw the numbers of their children taken by the government agency rise. In Alberta, it was 97%. In BC, it was 63%. And in Ontario, it was 72%. CAS intervenes in the lives of about 200,000 children every year. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled parents could not sue child welfare agencies. Provinces, it ruled, owe no, quote, duty of care, end quote, to the families. The article also goes into the history of the CAS. Quote, when journalist J.J. Kelso founded Canada's first Children's Aid Society in 1891, it was from revulsion of what he had witnessed working in Toronto slums. The filthy, homeless urchins begging on the streets, the school-age girls whored out by their parents for whiskey money, children needing rescue, Kelso exhorted. From the environments of vice, cruelty, and mendicancy. Court could imprison parents for cruelty, but not revoke custody. Backed by the 1893 Act for the Prevention of Cruelty to and Better Protection of Children, the Society had unique authority to directly intervene in affairs of parents and children. Anyone under 14 found begging, receiving alms, out late, homeless, orphaned, imprisoned, thieving, or associated with thieves, drunkards, or vagrants could be appropriated by the province. Since then, as children welfare agencies multiplied across Canada, their authority expanded too. End quote. Just like its American counterpart, the Child Protective Services, the Children's Aid Society has made a business of legally kidnapping children from good, happy homes and put them into foster care and group homes where abuse is rampant. A child will most likely face physical abuse, sexual assault, and medical-induced druggings, all in the name of CAS's budget. The people who commit an act such as this are nothing short of evil and need to be stopped.